Madeline is from Meredith, New Hampshire. She's an alumni of the philosophy program at Plymouth State University, and she's currently employed at Ledgewater Steakhouse in Bristol, New Hampshire.
Yes.
So welcome to the program.
We're so glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here with you too.
Well, and I'm very excited about this program because today's program is entitled Reflections in Nature. And Madeline is going to share with us her reflective approach to hiking and even how she incorporates mountaintop yoga, which I know you'll love, Jess.
So
You've talked about yoga multiple times.
I love yoga. I've never done it on a mountaintop.
Yes.
Summit, peak.
Yeah.
And there's some very
amazing.
awesome photos posted with Madeline doing yoga mountaintop. And then also how she used her hiking basically as a catalyst to work through some difficult times in her life. So hiking is near and dear to me. As you know, Madeline, you've gone on hikes with me. Have you hiked your whole life, or is this something you discovered later in life?
No, definitely. As a New Hampshire born and raised gal, I went hiking all throughout my childhood. Even close to my home, there's Lad Hill and Hamlin Park and Mount Major. I live near Gunstock, so Piper, the Gunstock Loop, Morgan, Percival, Holderness, Rattlesnake, Romney Rattlesnake, Osceola, Tecumseh, Passaconaway, the Sandwich Range.
She knows them all.
Yeah, I mean, those are all very close to home and all, frequent hikes that my family would take me up, and then, later on in life, my family would drag me up. Definitely had some great times. It was more about the journey up the mountain than being at the mountain when I was a kid. I remember when I was little, we used to have this hike up Lad Hill, which was literally seconds away from my house. And we had a Christopher Robin's tree. And I don't know who named it. It must have been my father, but it was this tree, and we would stop there for like hours and literally just hang out and climb the tree. And now it seems kind of silly to look back on it, but it was definitely one of the big memories of my childhood, and a big source of happiness.
Well, and I wouldn't say that's silly at all, because when we think about one of the areas I'm researching right now very deeply is philosophy of place.
Yes.
And so we can take a place like this hiking trail that literally thousands of people every year hike, and it becomes a different place in a sense for you or your family because of the areas of focus when you're going on the hike. Your routines, your particular routines as you hike, especially for anybody that hikes regularly, you start to have certain routines that you follow.
Definitely.
And then the memories, they end up compounding as you're, like now at your age, if you go back, I would imagine it's difficult to walk past that tree and not think, Christopher Robin's tree.
Yes. Even when I go for my morning run and I look down the hiking path, I instantly think back to hundreds of times where we were hanging out at the tree or the big rock up there with all the mica, those places, those philosophical places of happiness.
Well, we've talked multiple times on the show about memory and how none of our memories are really accurate. And so what we create as our memories, we embellish those, or we can actually make them sound worse than what they actually were. But if we had positive experiences, it transforms that experience beyond the reality of that experience that occurred, because our memory now creates this kind of embellished version of it.
And multiple people can experience the same place, right, and have different memories about it. I also think it's so beautiful when you talk about experiencing the journey and the climb, the hike up, and not necessarily just focusing on the summit and the destination, because I think very frequently in our culture, in this society, we place a lot of value on the destination and on the goal. Right. And sometimes that means, because we're all running around in our daily lives, sometimes that means that we're missing the moment and the journey, the step-by-step experience of getting to where we're going. And then when we get there, sometimes we forget to even appreciate that we're there and be grateful for it, which is why I think it is so amazing that you do the yoga, that you reflect at the summit, and it truly grounds you in that present moment.
I think a good way to look at it is you can know how to hike, but not understand how to hike.
Right.
And a lot of people, especially my age, want that instantaneous gratification, which is why Holderness Rattlesnake, if anyone wants that instantaneous gratification, is a great place to go. But it is more about understanding the process, the reason, the why you're coping and hiking, whatever it may be, rather than knowing where the summit is.
Well, that's a good life philosophy.
Absolutely.
Because we do get hung up in looking for that ultimate end goal and what's the purpose of life and the meaning, as if there's one thing, when in fact it's the hike, it's the process, the life we're living, where the true meaning lies. Yeah. So very valuable lesson.
I frequently go up Rattlesnake and Holderness, and because it's such an easy hike, let's be honest. I mean, I like it because it's so easy. And and when you get to the top, it's gorgeous.
Such a reward.
It's breathtaking. And so for the amount of energy I have to invest, I mean, I almost feel unworthy of this beautiful landscape at the summit. But I think that sometimes we rush when we get to that summit or we get to that goal, and then we think, okay, down the mountain we go, or up to the next summit we go, on the next hike, and we forget to truly be in that moment and experience the gratitude for where we came before we head off in the next direction.
And we miss things along the way. Very much so. So was there ever a time, because it sounds like you've been hiking since childhood, was there ever a time where you stopped hiking?
Definitely throughout high school. After my dad died when I was in middle school, I kind of just gave up on walking up hills and, walking out of hard quagmires, anything that was difficult.
Was it because you associated that with your father?
I think it was because I had so much else going on in my brain. I also had a really bad eating disorder. I had anorexia, so I was very consumed by that aspect of my life and school, that like the only thing important to me was counting calories and getting good grades. So anything that had to do with sports, friends, even family, not so much family because they were the only people that really, held me down during that time. But I just kind of gave up on things that were hard. So hiking took a step back from hiking, and pretty much all sports. My senior year, I don't think I did one sport other than managing the hockey team, which wasn't even me doing anything, but it definitely affected my life greatly in that way, where I didn't even, want to try. Yeah. I thought I was trying hard enough with those two things.
Right. So how'd you work through that? What brought you back?
I don't think so. I started over-exercising at first, but then I, taught myself moderation, and then, having to go through another quagmire in my life made me have to totally reevaluate everything and then start pushing myself, because there was a reason to push myself, because that reason being is that I was going to learn, and learning, to take care of myself.
To go along with the metaphor of hiking, and sometimes in life we get off the trail, and I can relate to that. When we were preparing for this show, I shared that when I was in college, I was a student athlete, I was over-exercising, I engaged in disordered eating, and I didn't have a really positive relationship with myself, my inner self, and my body. And that was a really long road off trail. I mean, that was a really difficult time. All consuming. And so sometimes then we get disconnected from the practices that ground us and that remind us how we truly are, the essence of who we are, and the practices that ground us and root us in that. So, I mean, I can relate to that.
Well, and I think it's so important to talk about, like when almost like an obsession with exercising or an addiction to exercising occurs, because that is one of the areas that societally we haven't focused on. We talk about anorexia, we talk about bulimia, But that person that is obsessed with exercising tends to look healthy and fit this kind of very shallow level of what that image is of health, and yet it's not healthy.
Right, and as a
something that's all-consuming.
Yes, as a student athlete, I mean, the emphasis is on your body, and the emphasis is, oh, you should be running 7 miles a day, you should be eating all the healthy food, you should be in the gym for hours upon hours every week, and that is not living a balanced life. And that, for me personally, was very unhealthy, with that emphasis on my physical appearance. And so I shared with you that for a year I didn't do any exercise. Now some people would look at that and say that is very unhealthy not to exercise. I did some yoga poses, I did some meditation, but outside of that I didn't run, and I had typically been running 10 miles a day. So I went a whole year to detox from using exercise as a way of of purging and feeling, in a sense, in control of my life. I share some of that experience in terms of getting off course and getting off track, and then finding my way back to, what's truly important in life, and how can I live a more balanced, more healthy life, and what are those practices that I want to implement, and some that I had in my childhood similar to you.
And that's what it seems to keep coming back to, is that Aristotelian notion of balance and moderation. That in and of itself, like not exercising at all, long term, my entire life, that probably isn't healthy. But that may be precisely what I need in the short term.
Right.
Or
to get back on track.
Eating that toaster strudel, or that.
Everyone knows I love the toaster strudel. Exactly. And for me, not exercising for that period of time meant that when I got back into exercising, I was making the commitment to myself that this is only going to be fun. I'm going to move my body in a way that's fun and feels good.
And to care.
And when I eat the toaster strudel at 10 o'clock at night, and sometimes I do, it's not about feeding my body healthy, nutritious food, obviously. It's about feeding my soul and finding my balance.
And not overdoing
it.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with music, and in particular the piano, playing the piano. When I was a child, I actually started with the guitar in music, but then moved to the piano, and something changed when I moved to the piano, because suddenly there were all these recitals and competitions and performances. And although initially I enjoyed it, eventually somewhere along the way it stopped being enjoyable. And I felt a lot of pressure and stress around it. And I was actually technically very good, but I wasn't enjoying it at all anymore. When I started college, I actually started as a piano major, and I do have my first degrees in music, but I knew by the end of my freshman year, this is not what I want to do the rest of my life. And I think it was because the joy had all fallen out of it. When I graduated with that music degree, I didn't touch a musical instrument for another decade. Just kind of walked away from it. It was kind of my purge. And when I came back to it, it was more enjoyable than it had ever been in my life, because that, again, just like your toaster strudel, now music's for me, and it's just for fun.
Right.
And sometimes I perform, sometimes I do compete, but only on my terms.
And many times those challenging moments, the moments we're tested, even traumas that we experience, can help remind us what is most meaningful and bring us back to ourselves, and so that we can find joy in the things that we love engaging in.
Yes.
Well, speaking of trauma, I find it extremely amazing, because I've gotten to see through the last 4 years and at college and the growth you've gone through. But when you talk about like the struggles, even through high school and that wasn't even the the lowest point that life was going to throw at you. Do you want to share a little bit with what you went through as a college student?
Yeah, definitely. Probably about 3 years ago, I had I'd say a bad boyfriend that I had been with for probably almost a year at that point, and he had moved to Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska. Which isn't the safest place in the world, let alone was I going to be safe. And he decided that he was going to shoot me. So one day he was an alcoholic, and he asked me at 10 a.m. if I wanted to go to the bar, because I had gone down to visit him for, I think it was spring break, and I was like, no, I have to write a paper. How about in a few hours? And so he went down to the bar, and I wrote my paper. He came back, and I may be a bartender at a steakhouse, but I really don't enjoy drinking, especially now. And so, he came back, and we ended up going to the bar, and I kind of just sat there and was miserable. And then he decided he was going to stay at the bar, and I started walking back, and he followed me back up there, and he had cleaned his guns after I told him no that morning. So his guns were out at that point. Usually he kept them in the safe, so it was kind of weird that he had taken them out. And as soon as I walked through the door, he shot me and went into the shower, and for the 4 hours that I was passed out on the floor, he was trying to get the gunpowder off of his hands. When I gained consciousness, I took off my tights, put them around my arm, threw up in my mouth, and begged him to call an ambulance. He wouldn't call an ambulance. He refused to help me in any way whatsoever. So I fell back unconscious. And when I think it had only been 10 minutes when I kind of woke back up, very, very pale. I looked at myself just over in the mirror that had, was to the ground. So I could kind of see what was happening, and it was not a pretty sight. I remember being at the hospital and thinking about all the blood everywhere. But I pressed the Uber app on my phone. I don't even really remember doing this, but somehow I was on the 6th floor, and somehow I ended up on the sidewalk, and the Uber guy found me. I think I crawled into the elevator because he didn't bring me, obviously. And someone, I think someone had helped me outside. So by the time the ambulance got there, because the Uber guy was like, I can't bring you anywhere. And by that time I was kind of out in the air, and I was just laying on the sidewalk, I need to stay conscious right now because I'm in the middle of the, Section 8 housing. I'm in the middle of the ghetto of Omaha. So I was awake enough to talk to the Uber driver, to look up at the Uber driver and have him be like, I need to call an ambulance. I'm just shaking my head, yes. So the ambulance got there, and I had 30 minutes left to live by the time the ambulance got there because of all the blood I had lost. And I had just got shot, in the arm with a hollow point. So although it wasn't my heart or my head, the fact that it was a hollow point, it blew just a huge hole through me, which really made me quite the mess. But
we did a lot of good, quick thinking in the moment, and that even when we think about where the show started with hiking, that not giving up, where you continue to fight for it, and I'm so glad you did, because that way you're still with us today. But it also shows, and such a valuable lesson for so many individuals, male or female, that are in abusive relationships. It can only go one direction. It's going to continue to get worse, so you've got to tell someone and get out of those situations.
But it's so hard when you're in it.
Oh, it's hard.
So hard.
Well, it becomes your reality. Yeah. It's kind of like your new normal.
I had a really unhealthy relationship towards the end of high school into college, and it's so hard when you're in it to see that, to see the warning signs. And thankfully, I was surrounded by so many amazing family members and friends who helped me see the light. But when you are in it, with perspective, now you can look back and say, oh yeah, that wasn't healthy. But at the time, it was hard.
Well, and that's something that, is so difficult to work through even after the fact. Once the emergency side of it is taken care of, and now you're at the hospital and you're in recovery, what did you have to deal with and go through? Because this has been now 3 years, if I remember correctly. So what do those 3 years look like?
So it looked like a lot of me sitting in my bed with my dog for the first bit because I couldn't get out and move. Looked like a lot of rebuilding my nerves in my arm. My arm is still broken. I still don't have all my radial and ulnar nerve movement back in my hand. So every time I have to do something with my hand, itch myself, write something, drink water, I'm always thinking, I'm telling my hand to do that. And I know I'm doing that. It's the weirdest feeling ever. And,
And I never told this to you before, but I can remember that was one thing that really struck me when you returned to class afterwards, and your arm, there was a lot of mobility that you were still getting back. And what really struck me is how much drawing you always did before this. And I remember thinking, how are you going to fight back? Are you going to switch hands now and try to do it with the other hand? Are you going to have to try to get this back up? Because we do have a dominant hand when it comes to that. And that was such a source of creative release for you that I felt was also taken away in that temporary.
And oddly enough, I didn't draw for two years. Just recently I started drawing again. A lot, just doing a lot of art, and I started with arts and crafts, easier things, scrapbooking, fancy writing, and then probably I want to say last fall I started drawing again, and just this spring my boss is having me draw up his ad, and there's
I'm thrilled to hear
there's a lot of new styles that I have writing. I used to have that tiny handwriting. I still kind of have it, but it's a lot. My handwriting looks a lot different than it once did, and it's not so neat now, but at least I have it.
And Maddie, you are remarkable.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, listening to this story, it's so powerful, and you are so strong and inspiring for so many people in terms of having the courage to share your story. Because so many people experience hardships.
Well, and that resiliency.
Yeah,
because that is the thing, especially we're seeing in today's society a lot of individuals giving up. In New Hampshire, we don't talk about it a lot, but the suicide rate is high, and especially amongst youth. And increasing. And it does seem to be this, in a way, some sort of lack of resiliency, that ability to see through the dark times and bounce back or find a new way of being. Because it may be, you were very fortunate. You might not have been able to ever draw again. So what do we do with that,
And the resiliency, it requires a connection inward. It requires having self-awareness and connection to self so that you can connect with others. And it sounds like, from hearing you talk about your story, that you were able to find that again in hiking. So can you tell us a little bit about how did you get back into hiking, and what has that given you in terms of going through this time period in your life?
So I first started hiking actually that spring. So it happened in the early spring, and then by the summertime I was hiking about 3 years ago. And one of my first hikes that season was I did the Franconia Loop, and I do all my hikes by myself now. I like it that way. That way no one can hear me when I'm having an asthma attack while I'm walking up the mountain.
It's a solitude.
I'm let me just run up the mountain and everything's going to be fine.
And it's a very different experience hiking alone.
It is.
Because I do both. I do group hiking and I do alone. It's very different hiking
especially when you've gone on the same trail with one, which when we did the Castle in the Clouds hike, I hadn't hiked really with anyone since probably my first year back into hiking. So talking to other people, usually I literally just trail run, and I run up the mountain and I'm all in my head, or all looking at the ground and my surroundings. But instead of respecting nature and loving nature and what's around me, I was listening and giving my full attention to other beings.
Which I don't know if you're familiar with the Castle in the Clouds hike. This was a happiness hike that occurred last summer that I led with a group I think we had about 10
Yeah,
or 12 on
13,
that.
yeah.
And Maddie took photos.
Right.
Yeah.
And for those that may not be familiar with Castle in the Clouds, I highly recommend a visit
gorgeous.
to Castle in the Clouds. It's just an awesome place. But they have, when we talk about hikes with great rewards, they have this hike that has like 7 different waterfalls,
Yeah.
and it's not a
Wow.
difficult hike. Like you can take the family, you can take young kids.
Sign
and
me
so
up.
we did a happiness hike and kind of hiked it as a
great.
group, which was fun.
Yeah, it was. It was a totally different experience, and I have to say, I was totally against hiking with others and everything, you know, that had to do with me being on the mountain with other people. I even would leave my house at 3 a.m. so I would miss the whole
So you
group
don't
of
see the
people.
other people.
Yeah. And I'm like, all right, okay, hello, how are you doing? But it's a whole different experience when you're with someone else because you're having an experience together, which, you know, I still really don't, you know, right after that toxic relationship, I had another toxic relationship. And I really don't trust people still because of that. And to be able to go into my place, my hiking place, and have others there and not feel judged and not feel even like nervous or anxious while they're there, it was like awe-inspiring to me because usually it's just like immediately I see someone and when I'm hiking I'm like, no, this is my spot.
You're on my trail. So you know.
And then, you know, going with you, and I, you know, remember connecting with that woman at the end there, and just to have an experience with someone else, it really is something to treasure.
And this particular experience wasn't simply like hiking on a crowded mountain, which is my least favorite when I go for a hike and we're in groups but not by choice.
Yeah, I know.
Or even where groups might meet up, because I've done hikes like with friends or family members where we decide we're all going to hike together, and it's fun because you have these relationships, pre-existing relationships
Right.
with people you're hiking the mountain with. But this particular hike, and we're actually looking to offer more of these, there was this additional element that everyone came with the same intention. They knew we were going to move through the hike as a group, and we were going to stop and reflect along the way. And that's something that I know we're quickly running out of time for today's program, but I'd like you to share with us a little bit about this reflective element, because I think that's key.
Yes.
And especially when you're hiking alone, but it can happen in groups as well. How is this reflective approach to hiking that you now take different than, say, when you were hiking with your family as a child?
When I hike alone, first of all, I first realized that when I was hiking and reflecting, I needed to take care of myself. So reflecting upon my hike, or reflecting while I'm hiking, I'm thinking of my safety. I'm thinking of, you know, like getting to the top of the mountain and communicating with someone at the bottom for safety. But also I'm thinking about when I go to the top of the mountain and do my yoga, I want to be able to take in the earth around me. I want to be able to love myself when I'm up there, and to, you know, bend my body and make sure I'm all stretched out, and just breathe, because oftentimes we forget to breathe and appreciate the things around us. And as a token of hiking, these are 2 heart rocks for you ladies.
Thank you. And I have to tell you, I want to express my gratitude. You are just amazing. You're a beautiful soul. And, you know, we've talked on this show that happiness, finding happiness, is not about, you know, being happy with all kinds of positive experiences. So many things happen in life, right? And some of them are really hard and traumatic and difficult. And I just think it is so extraordinary how you responded to that circumstance in your life, and you found meaning and purpose, and the way that you reflect in your hikes and your yoga. I just think it's so inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming.
Yes.
And the takeaway today is an easy one. Just breathe.
Just breathe.
Just breathe.
It's a good lesson. I need to remember that.
Especially on our next few hikes, because let's